All right, everybody, if you'd like to open up your scriptures to this week's Torah reading, we're going to be reading Genesis 32:3 to 36:43. And today we'll be reading on chapter 32. And we're going to continue to see the story about Jacob. You want to turn in there and read along with me. We last ended off in Genesis 32. We read the first two chapters. We see Jacob going on his way and the angels of Yahweh meeting him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of Elohim," and he called the name of that place Mahanaim, which means two camps. So now we're starting in Genesis 32, chapter 3. And Jacob sent messages before his face to his brother Esau, to the land of Seir, to the field of Edom. Now you have to understand, Jacob was traveling. He left behind him Laban and everything that was going on behind him. And he couldn't go back. He had to move forward. But now he had to face his brother, who he fled from years ago because he stole the blessing, and his brother was furious, and his brother had planned to kill him. And his mother and his father agreed that he would be best to be gone and to go to his kindred and to find a wife. And not only did he find one wife, not only did he find two wives, not only three, but four wives. But Yahweh blessed him at this point with 11 children. And here he was with his wife and his children and his many flocks and his servants, his male and female slaves, and they were traveling all together. And Jacob was thinking ahead and not fully trusting Yahweh yet at this point, but we're going to see a very humbling experience where he does finally come to submit to Yahweh. But he's still trying to take things in his own hands here. And yes, Yahweh teaches us to be good stewards of our life and our time and to witness for Yeshua. But still, Jacob is not trusting Yahweh. And Jacob sends messages to go to his brother Esau ahead of him, to let him know he's coming. And with Jacob's manipulative family structure, he's trying to think of ways to manipulate his brother, or to at least soothe his brother from the anger that he last left him at. And, Yahweh told him to go back. That's the thing. Yahweh told him to go back home. And Yahweh would not put him in a situation of harm without protecting him. But he didn't realize that. And he was trying to take care of the situation himself. He brought a lot of stress amongst himself. And this is what many people often do. When Yahweh puts us in a situation, we kind of ignore that Yahweh is the one in control of this and wouldn't put us in danger. And we stress out and create a lot of stress on us that is unnecessary. And it's distrusting into Yahweh. And until we come to a point of humility where we say, Yahweh put us here. And Yahweh could have kept Jacob in the land, but Yahweh told him to leave. And he left. But he was really worried about his brother. So Jacob sent messages before him to his brother. This is in verse 3. And at that moment, it never said what happened in that meeting. All it said was that they were coming, 400 of the men with his brother. But Jacob told his servants to tell him, first he calls him his master. He says, you shall say, this is verse 4. And he commanded them to say, you shall say to my master Esau, your servant Jacob says this, I have sojourned with Laban and remained until now. So you got to remember, back then, they didn't have, internet or even mail like they do today. So even though they weren't too far apart by today's standards. Back then, they were really far apart and they weren't communicating on a regular basis with what's going on. And it's very doubtful that Esau knew what was happening. Or if Esau knew where his brother was, he might have, in his anger, went down there and tried to kill him there. But we also have to remember that according to this here, Isaac was not dead yet. And in Esau's promise, until Isaac died, he wasn't going to take revenge on Jacob. You know, if Jacob had any time to worry and fear, it should have been after Isaac died, which we'll see later, which happens. But Jacob didn't know how Esau was going to react. Jacob was very worried about this situation, for he had left Laban, but he's coming towards his home, and he had to face a hot-tempered Esau who wanted to kill him. And we continue to read here, and it says, "And it is mine to have oxen and donkeys, flocks and slaves and slave girls, and I have sent to tell my master to find favor in your eyes." So he's pleading here to find favor in his eyes. And the messages came back. So it didn't say what happened in the meeting. It just says he sent them. And the messages came back to Jacob saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and also he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Now, if you want to see fear or worry, if Jacob wasn't worrying by now he's worrying. 400 men are coming. You know, we see here in verse 7, "And Jacob was afraid and he was distressed." You see, when you don't trust Yahweh, that's the situation you're going to be in. And I would submit to you, anytime you're distressed or afraid of man or man's ways or a situation that you're in, you're not fully trusting Yahweh. Yahweh wants us to be humble. Yahweh wants to put us into humbling situations, and he wants to keep us humble. You know, and there's many different emotions Yahweh wants us to experience in life. But afraid and distressed of man and man's ways is not what Yahweh wants us to be. And if we have confidence in Yahweh, we're not going to be stressed in these situations. So we need to be aware of this, the emotions we feel. There's many times when we go through things, and the enemy is going to try to attack us one way or the other. You know, we hear often the words fear Yahweh and fear Yahweh, but in reality, in scripture, it doesn't say fear, it says to be in awe of Yahweh, to be in awe of him. You know, and we look at the word fear and worry and distress. These are things we're trained or deceived by the enemy to experience and live with. You know, and sometimes Yahweh gives us fear of things that we shouldn't be doing. You know, we should have a fear of sinning, because that means we're going to create a big issue with ourselves. So we should have a fear of being around dangerous situations to kind of like have our endorphins to alert us, like, hey, get away from there. You know, if a snake or an animal is about to attack you, you should have some fear, which you'll get some adrenaline to run away. So this is a natural physical response in some situations. But when we make that physical response an emotional, thoughtful decision, that fear of escaping to be in danger has now become part of our lives, and it becomes part of our spiritual life. And now we're following the enemy, and we're not following Yahweh, who doesn't want us to premeditate fear of these things. Yes, I'm not one that's fond of heights and being in high places that aren't secure. But that's not the type of fear I'm talking about. I'm talking about the premeditated fear of worrying about these things. And Yahweh put Jacob in that situation. Yahweh told him to leave. Yahweh put him there. So why was Jacob fearing? Because he had a lack of trust in Yahweh, a lack of understanding and communication with Yahweh. So prayerfully, we read here in verse 7, and Jacob was afraid and he was very distressed. Distress leads to physical disease. When Yahweh says, know the plans I have for you, they are for good and not disaster, to give you a future and give you a hope, everything that the enemy wants is to destroy us and attack us and make us worry and have fear. But Yahweh wants us to have joy. And I understand it's hard in certain situations. I understand it seems like, how could a person be confident and joyful when so much around them is just bad reports and negative things? But Yahweh says to be joyful. So Jacob again tried to take matters into his own hands, and here in verse 7, and he divided the people with him, and the flocks, and the herds, and the camels into 2 camps. And he said, if Esau comes to one company and strikes it, then it will be the company that is left shall escape. And Jacob said, O Elohim of my father Abraham, and Elohim of my father Isaac, Yahweh, who said to me, go back to your land and your kindred, I will deal with you. I am not worthy of all the mercies and all the truth in which you have done for your servant. For I passed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become 2 companies. So finally, out of fear, and I often say fear can be a great motivator sometimes, but out of fear, Jacob finally humbles himself. And this is the first time I see Jacob showing such a humble attitude towards Yahweh. Jacob pleading with Yahweh and saying in verse 10, I'm not worthy of all these mercies and all the truth which you have done for me. So he's pleading with him, and he's submitting himself to Yahweh here for really the first time. And then in verse 11, he says, deliver me, I pray, for the hand of my brother from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest I come to strike me, mother to son. And remember, when you have fear, that's the answer right there. Pray to Yahweh. Pray to Yahweh. And here Jacob is praying to Yahweh and admitting his fear or his lack of faith in Yahweh. And that's the situation we're in here. And now Jacob's having a conversation with Yahweh, and that's what praying is. Praying is a conversation with him. It's talking to him. When he said here in verse 12, and you said, dealing I will deal well with you, and I will make your seed like the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitude. So he already kind of did that with all 11 children. Jacob already had his seed. Jacob was fearing for his life here, because even though Yahweh said, you'll be numbered from the multitude, Jacob was no longer needed. His seed was already spread. But Jacob was trying to pull out everything possible to humble himself to Yahweh. And he remained there that night and took a present from which came into his hand for his brother Esau. That was 13, verse 14. And 200 she-goats, and 20 he-goats, and 20 rams. 30 nursing camels with their 30 colts, 40 cows and bulls, and 20 she-donkeys, and 10 young donkeys. And gave into the hand of his slaves every drove by itself. And he said to his slaves, pass over before my face, and put space between the drove and drove. So he didn't know what his brother had or the situation of his brother at that time. Just as Esau was a surprise to learn that he had gathered so much, that Jacob had gathered so much, Jacob didn't know what Esau had or didn't have at that time. And he commanded his droves, and he saying to the first one in verse 17, when my brother Esau meets you and asks, saying, whose are you and where do you go? And whose are these before you? Then you will say, your servant Jacob, it is a present sent to my master, to Esau. And behold, also behind us. And he also commanded the second and the third, and all the ones going after in drones, saying, you shall speak this word to Esau when you find him. And you shall also say, behold, your servant Jacob is behind you. For he said, I will cover his face before the present. The one going before my face, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will lift up my face. And all the present and the past before his face, and remained in the camp that night. So here we see him in the camp, and all of them went before him. He's about to meet his brother. And he was in a quite interesting situation. He couldn't go backwards. Laban was back there, and he already made a covenant with him. He couldn't stay where he was. He was in the middle of the wilderness. He had to move forward. And he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 slave girls, his 11 children, and he passed over the ford Jabbok. And he told them and sent them over to the stream. He took them and sent them over the stream, and he sent over that which was his. And Jacob was left alone. Now remember, the last time he was alone was when he was going to the land to meet Laban. And he had that dream about the ladder of the angels going up and down the ladder. And he spoke to Yahweh, and Yahweh made the promise, and he said there, if Yahweh will do all these things, then he will be my Elohim. But he lived his life in fear of going back to Jacob. He lived his life in fear of Laban. He lived his life in distress. And here we find in verse 24, Jacob was left alone. But the scriptures say, and it's a verse that we don't hold on to close enough, for Yahweh giveth and he taketh away. Here Jacob was left alone once again in the wilderness, in the darkness. Last time he was left alone, he went to sleep. A ladder appeared, and in the dream, Yahweh spoke to him and showed him the angels going up and down. But now we see here in verse 24, he's left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the rising of the dawn. Now it's interesting, verse 24. It says he was left alone, but a man wrestled with him. Now, if he was alone, how was there a man with him? Then he wasn't alone. He was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the rising of the dawn. So let's look at this verse a little bit more. So we know it was the middle of the night and it was darkness. And until the lightness came, until the dawn came, this wasn't a little 3-minute match here. This was a big match, a big wrestling match going on here. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the rising of the dawn. Now, there's many different opinions about who this man was, but I don't think that Jacob wrestled with him. I think the man was the one doing the wrestling, and Jacob was the one that was holding on all he can to just survive the night. Jacob wasn't known to be a wrestler or a man of war or violence or a hunter or anything like that. And Jacob was left alone, and the man wrestled with him. Now, I know the Orthodox Jewish people would actually say that this was the adversary wrestling with him. But from all scripture that I see, this itself was Yahshua. This was the salvation of Yahweh wrestling with Jacob. Remember, Jacob was just humbled, and he's about to be humbled some more as a consistent reminder to what how he should be and so on. So they were wrestling, and he said he saw that he had not prevailed against him, and he touched his hip and his socket, and Jacob's hip socket was unhinged as he wrestled with him. So those of you that think this was just some spiritual confrontation, well, Yahweh has the power to just say a word and it can happen. But this was literally something physical, and Jacob was left with an ailment to remind him of what had happened here. And then he said, "Send me away, for the dawn has ascended." And he said, "I will not let go unless you bless me." So here we see Jacob just holding on for his dear life. While the other man wrestled and broke his hip pretty much, Jacob was just holding on for his life and asked for a blessing. So it appears Jacob knew what was going on and who he was wrestling with. And I would suggest this was a spiritual and a physical event. And this was the salvation of Yahweh right there. Yahshua, the one many call Jesus. And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with Elohim and with man and have prevailed." So he held on, he prevailed, he didn't give up. And I would suggest to all of you out there that are struggling not to give up. I would suggest to hold on. It might seem like a going back and forth, a wrestling match, or Yahweh might humble you in certain ways with an ailment or something else. But prevail and hold on. Remember that. Setbacks that seem like tragedies in our lives sometimes is our wrestling with Yahweh. Jacob needed to be humbled. And Yahweh said, "Your name shall be called Israel." And Jacob asked and said, "Please reveal your name." And he said, "Why is it that you ask about my name?" And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, because I saw Elohim face to face, and my life is delivered. Hallelujah. Who's the only deliverer? The only one that can do that. The salvation part of Yahweh. And to see him physically had to be Yahshua, face to face. No one can see Yahweh face to face, but Yahweh in his part, in the Yahshua, in his salvation, appears once again. And Jacob sees him face to face. And Jacob says, the man, or the face of Yahweh, the face of El, his salvation, and he has delivered. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. And the sun rose on him, and he passed over Peniel, and he was limping on his thigh. And that was his humility there, the reminder of how we need to remember Yahweh. And he's put things in our lives to remind us of certain situations. But we got to remember Yahweh's there to deliver us. And he delivered Jacob that night. Jacob took on that night a limp, but he freed himself of so much distress that night. And it was in the darkness alone at nighttime that Yahweh again appeared to him and humbled him. And we go here to see something interesting in the last verse here. It says, on account of this, the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket until this day, because he struck on Jacob's hip socket, on the sinew of the thigh. So it's interesting that this has become a tradition, but it's a remembrance May the humbling of Jacob be upon us, and when we remember that, and remember what it took place here. And for those of you that say Yahweh is not speaking to you, this is what the word is. Yahweh is speaking to us in his scriptures, talking to us, helping us, and telling us these things. And may we all see the face of Yahweh and be delivered. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. This is the Torah reading to start us off for this week's Torah portion. And that's Genesis 32. We're going to be reading all the way through Genesis 36 this week. Please read along with me so we get a better understanding of all the great things that are happening in this story. Hallelujah. We continue to lift up all your prayers. May Yahweh be with you this day and always. And no stress. You're too blessed to be stressed. Hallelujah. Have a great day, everybody. A great week. Go out there and shine in the darkness. Shine your light and proclaim Yahshua. Hallelujah. Shalom, shalom, everybody.